Um, let's see. He says, right, these symbolic maxims are chosen from a much larger number of them that you could find. Each carries an ethical and occasionally a metaphysical meaning, which in some cases a reader can discern for himself, and others perhaps not. Traditional and probable interpretations of the more obscure ones are offered in the notes. So let's read number, who's Eric? Or actually, why don't we start here? Mario, number one.
Okay, number one. Step not beyond the center of the balance.
Okay, why don't you read 2 and 3?
Go not by the public road. Assist the men in lifting the burden, not in laying it down.
So the notes, I don't know if you know what that's referring to, but if you go to page 309, I think, or it's at 307, do you see that there? Do you want to read? He says, the interpretations that follow are based on explanations offered by later Greek writers like Iamblichus, or either Pythagoreans or friendly to it like Porphyry. So remember I said there were commentaries on them? Do you want to read page 307 at the bottom?
307?
Yeah. So it says S 1 to 3. So just to show you that this is his commentary based on these other people. Page 307 at the bottom. Yeah. So when I was telling you that there's an explanation, he gives the explanation for all of them, both them and the golden verses and notes. But you might not notice that because there's no footnotes.
Okay. At very bottom?
Yep.
Okay. The interpretation.
There is no S 1 to 3.
Oh, okay. There is no difficult about these, since the symbolic meaning of balance, of privacy, and of taking out a burden have become commonplace.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, and we were saying how you find them in scripture. So, right, that's basically what he's saying. Now, remember, he's definitely a secularist. You can tell from certain things that he writes. This is kind of natural reason that can use symbols to talk about virtue. And so, right, it's the gospel can build on the culture and take what's good in the culture, see, as opposed to the narrative of what does Athens have to do with Jerusalem, which is what Tertullian said. And his answer is nothing. And my answer is a whole lot. Right? They have a whole lot to do with each other. Because, right, the gospel is preached in a given culture, in a Hellenistic culture that was influenced by Greek. It was a blend of Greek and Hebrew. Let's see if there's any other ones that are. S8, right? Always serve salt with a meal, and then the note on page 308, he says, compare Jesus' words in Matthew 5:13. Right. So, the idea of salt is representing purity. S9, James, want to read S9?
Do not throw stones into fountains.
And then on page 308, the explanation. Because the explanations are not obvious, right? I mean, they're kind of mysterious, and that's the whole point. Remember, it was a secret teaching of that esoteric idea. It's meant to be kind of kept secret. That's the esoteric idea. The meaning is esoteric. But remember, even with that, they still ended up getting it. Basically, their buildings getting burned down, and a number of them getting killed and getting dispersed. So, the explanation?
S9.
Yep, that's when you read, yeah.
Don't solely the sources of spiritual regeneration.
Right, so, right, the fountain is what you drink from, so don't throw dirty rocks in it. S10, Matthew? I know you guys were laughing about this one.
Do not urinate in the direction of the sun.
And then the explanation?
Don't perform vulgar actions in the presence of what is holy.
Okay.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, Apollo being the sun,
Right, and also just their cosmology. Basically, that text we read it was from the Pythagorean Memoirs about the soul being made of breath, and then it goes to the upper air. The upper air is called the ether. So, like, as you get away from the earth. It's like a happier region for your soul to be in. It's closer to the sun. So the sun is symbolizing like light, kind of like truth. Because it is quite fascinating, right? S11, I guess Brother James, and then the explanation.
Do not stick iron into anyone's footprints.
Honestly, I mean, I wouldn't know what that's supposed to mean, but
Explanation is don't sully a man's past reputation.
right. So that's why I was saying it's against like gossip. Maybe we'll just do one more. I mean, they're all interesting, but next one,
Let no swallows rest on your roof.
and then explanation.
Swallows symbolize idle chatter.
Because we talked about how they had a practice of silence in the morning and kind of a monastic life not based on revelation like with us, but based on natural reason.
S20 is interesting.
Do you want to read it, Matthew? We could do one last one. Yeah, go ahead.
S20, wear no rings containing images of the gods. Explanation, do not make a public display of your religion.
Right. So see, they are trying to. They're not just. He's not just a polytheist, right? When they talk about Apollo or Hermes, remember he said Hermes gods. So these are non-anthropomorphic, right? They're not the anthropomorphic gods. So kind of downplaying the anthropomorphism and rather, they're spirits, not these anthropomorphic beings. Okay, so they're all quite fascinating. You can read all but just so you know, because otherwise when you read it, it's just obscure. I mean, he does mention this in the notes, but remember the first time I saw it, I was like, well, where are the notes? Because there's no footnotes. Well, it's there on page 308. So be aware that the notes at the end of the book are quite helpful. So when you read it, you should read the notes. Like if you read Heraclitus, look at the back, but there's no footnotes. You have to be aware that they're there. Remember, I think I mentioned this at the beginning, right? I said it's good to kind of familiarize yourself with the book as soon as you get a book. It's a kind of basic habit that especially maybe has kind of been lost, especially nowadays. So much of media is, technological, internet-based. But, right, I mean, he has an index, which is helpful. He has a big glossary, right? That would be helpful to look at with all these different, and it's a good glossary, right? He has a lot of good terms in there. And then he has these extensive notes that explain, otherwise it would just be, these are quite obscure. Okay. So let's go on to Heraclitus then. So he comes after Parmenides and Pythagoras, and right away we can see the continuity here. So his introduction is quite good, but let's just dive into the text because you can read that on your own. I want to keep moving forward. So on page 69, I guess Jake, number 6.
Page 69. Are we on the pre-Socratics or?
Yeah, pre-Socratic.
Okay. The book, wait.
Yes, we do.
Oh, this, yeah.
At the bottom, number 6.
Much learning does not teach understanding. Otherwise, it would have taught Hesiod and Pythagoras, Xenophanes and Picteus.
Okay. So, right, we just have these fragments. We don't have any complete work. But you can get a lot from the fragments, and it's kind of like the more you work on the pre-Socratics, the more you can kind of fill out the picture. So the Greek word here for much learning is the word polymathy. If you're familiar with the word a polymath, it's someone who knows about a whole bunch of different subject areas. That we use that word in English, right? So polymathy does not teach understanding. Well, that does make sense for Pythagoras, because remember, what did he work on? Well, Pythagorean theorem, geometry, music with the octave, astronomy, cosmology, right? All these different things, right? And so he's aware that Pythagoras is saying, and remember he tied it all together, where everything is basically numbers, and they assign numbers to all these different things. We didn't really talk too much about that, but right, even things like, what about the soul and the afterlife? So he's aware that that's a good characterization of Pythagoras, right? Like what we just saw. But then he says it doesn't teach understanding. So he's critical of Pythagoras. He's critical of him kind of making up this kind of system where the math and the music, right, the music of the spheres, like, do we experience that? Right, if you listen at night, do you hear the music of the spheres? Like, you might remember that from Shakespeare. Well, no, we don't. So that's Heraclitus saying he's just making stuff up, right? There is no music of the spheres. It would have taught Hesiod, right? Well, Hesiod, right, the Theogony, telling us where the gods came from. So even more clearly than previously, that rejection of the myths and rejection of anthropomorphism, right? Because basically Homer and Hesiod would be like, I don't know, the Old and New Testament or something for us, right? That's the base of their religion. And he's saying no, that he lacked understanding. But then also he's basically attacking everything. This is actually how a lot of philosophers will function. That everything before them, they criticize. Xenophanes, what was his view? Anybody? Yeah.
Xenophanes, monotheism.
Right. So Hesiod represents
Anthropomorphic
polytheism, and then what does Xenophanes represent?
Monotheism.
So the opposite. So what does he think? Is he agreeing with one side against the other?
Doesn't seem.
No, he's saying they're both wrong. So that it's also illuminating to see these contrasts, right? He's setting up these contrasts, so it kind of helps you show, right? He's aware Xenophanes is rejecting monotheism. He said, but that's wrong too, right? Because he doesn't say, oh, but Xenophanes was right. I say that because some ancient writers will say, well, Heraclitus thought that there was God with capital G. But if that's so, like even Clement of Alexandria, right, who is the source for some of these fragments, he was writing in like 200 AD. There was a great library in Alexandria, you may know, so he had access to the text. It burned, it actually burned more than once, and they rebuilt it more than once, but before these things were lost. But right, that contrast there is illuminating. It kind of, if we were doubting, well, is Xenophanes really a monotheist, or what is he? Well, he's contrasting him with Hesiod, with Pythagoras then, and Hecataeus was a historian, but in the sense of the myths and legends, right? The history for them means like the legend of Perseus, right? It doesn't mean, Herodotus is the first one to really do what we would call history. And Pythagoras did, talk. He did, right? Mention, remember, Hermes guides your soul. So he still will talk about the gods. So whether it's Hesiod and Hecataeus or all these different figures, he's disagreeing with. It's funny. I still did anyone find the text where he said about Pythagoras with the man hitting the puppy or the dog, and he said he was the soul? No. Okay. Yeah, I for some reason I couldn't find that. I didn't know if it might be in the because Heraclitus is the one who quoted that. Heraclitus is the one who says, when Pythagoras was out for a walk, someone was hitting the dog. So another thing he would reject from Pythagoras here would be reincarnation, right? So this is kind of the empirical mindset. So just for an example, number 5, Robert.
Let us not make arbitrary conjectures about the greatest matters.
Right. So Pythagoras is saying there's a music of the spheres. Right? Can you see how that's an arbitrary conjecture? Right? We don't hear any music. I mean, it's true, the night sky can be very beautiful and peaceful, but so let's not just make some arbitrary conjecture against Pythagoras with his his kind of cosmology and so on. Number 4, Robert?
Seekers after gold dig up much earth, find a little.
So what is that a kind of metaphor for? Anybody? Christian?
Like, people can think of a lot of stuff that's not useful, but rarely ever will they find some sort of nugget of wisdom.
Exactly.
Truth.
Even the word nugget of wisdom, that's we still have those metaphors, kind of like we saw with Pythagoras. Like some of these metaphors that naturally come to mind, like exactly a nugget, meaning that little gold nugget that you have to sit in the stream for hours to find, right? So he's making that point, which is true. I mean, he's right about that, whether it's science or philosophy. Number 4, Ricky? I'm sorry, number 3.
Okay. Men who love wisdom should acquaint themselves with a great many particulars.
So this is what you could call his empiricism. Like we should look at the world around us, right? Not like Pythagoras inventing the music of the spheres. There's talking about reincarnation, right? Basically inventing things.
Would you say that he's kind of a pessimist and that kind of influences his philosophy?
Right. That's what the introduction talks about.
Yeah.
Because Wheelwright actually published a book with these same translations, and then commentary. It's a short book, maybe like 150 pages. So he makes that point in the. There is a pessimism there. Now, Wheelwright kind of downplays the pessimism, but I mean, certainly some of these fragments I think are. We'll read some that really are pessimistic, no matter how you slice it. By the way, the word "men who love wisdom," this is actually the Greek says philosophos, so meaning philosophers. So philosophers should acquaint themselves with a great many particulars. So that's one of the earliest uses of the word philosopher, or really I think it's actually the earliest. The Milesians never used the word philosopher. Pythagoras, as I said, we don't really have any direct words of his or any writing, so this is the first occurrence of the word philosophy in whatever 520 BC. Okay, let's go to the next page on the kind of empiricism note. So number 11, Matthew, let me read 11 to 13.
The things of which there can be sight, hearing, and learning, these are what I especially prize.
Right, so whereas Pythagoras is maybe more idealistic, kind of inventing things, everything is number, that's very idealistic. Like he wants to be empirical. Okay.
Eyes are more accurate witnesses than ears. 13. Eyes and ears are bad witnesses to men having barbarian souls.
Okay, so certainly like you could apply it to the myths, right? They see the rainbow and they think, oh well, it's I don't know, the goddess Iris, right? As opposed to saying, and Xenophanes had pointed out, right, that it's effect of light on water droplets, because you could observe a rainbow at a waterfall. It doesn't have to be up in the sky. You can make that connection. What do you keep going?
One should not act or speak as if he were asleep.
Okay, so
We've all been there.
So Heraclitus is very he really is quite brilliant, right, in his own way, and a lot of what he's saying is, even if we don't necessarily agree with his materialism, he is extremely fundamental for philosophy in general, and his way of writing is these little sayings, these little pithy sayings. They're often somewhat paradoxical. Okay.
The waking have one world in common, whereas each sleeper turns away to a private world of his own.
Okay. So is he questioning reality? No, right? He's saying when you're dreaming, that's your own private world, but when you're awake, that's the real world, right? So different from, like, remember we talked about Descartes? For Descartes, I don't know if I'm dreaming. Okay. So some of these are. So his nickname was Heraclitus the Obscure, because some of these are very hard to figure out, and unlike with Pythagoras, we don't have commentaries that explain them, because he didn't really have a school the way Pythagoras did. But number 16, I think this is the pessimism.
Whatever we see when awake is death, when asleep, dreams.
Right, so I think this is, right, there's no immortality of the soul here, there's just, life is going to end. Number 7.
Nature loves to hide.
So this is the theme of trying to find the underlying causes, like we were talking about mythos versus logos. Well, logos is a term he uses. We can go back to that. That was on the first page. Go ahead.
The Lord whose oracle is at Delphi neither speaks nor conceals, but gives signs.
So that's Apollo, right? The oracle of Apollo, which is a woman who would speak and make these kind of oracular pronouncements. Basically, they were riddles, but they would have some meaning to them. So that's true, and he's saying that Apollo doesn't hide things. He doesn't just tell you it. He gives you some sign you have to figure out. So this is, when you take that together with nature loves to hide, he's saying we have to try to figure out what's going on underneath the appearances of nature. Okay?
Unless you give the unexpected, you will never.
Unless you expect.
Sorry.
Okay.
Unless you expect the unexpected, you will never find truth, for it is hard to discover and hard to attain.
Okay. So the difficulty of finding truth, we've seen that on the previous page. Let's go back to page 1, fragment 1, Zeke. So remember that distinction between mythos and logos? I mean, really that distinction is kind of from Heraclitus, because the previous thinkers haven't used the word logos in this broad sense. And he is the most, he's now openly criticizing myths. We're going to see, right, and you've already read them, but we'll stress some of them where it's very clear that he's attacking the myths. And he's also talking about logos, meaning like reason. Okay.
Although this logos is eternally valid, yet men are unable to understand it, not only before hearing it, but even after they have heard it for the first time. That is to say, although all things come to pass in accordance with this logos, men seem to be quite without any experience of it. At least they are judged in the light of such words and deeds as I am here setting forth. My own method is to distinguish each thing according to its nature and to specify how it behaves. Other men, on the contrary, are as neglectful of what they do when awake as they are when asleep.
So, right, criticism of the myths and just like a lack of really understanding nature. Christian, number 2, similar theme.
We should let ourselves be guided by what is common to all. Yet, although the logos is common to all, most men live as if each of them had a private intelligence of his own.
Okay. So, so what is his solution then? Right, what is this logos that he has discovered that he wants to tell us about? Christian, do you want to read number 20? Starting 20. So this is now getting into his positive teaching, not just his criticism.
Under universal flux. Number 20. Everything flows and nothing abides. Everything gives way and nothing stays fixed.
And keep going.
Heraclitus 21. You cannot step twice into the same river for other waters, and yet others go ever flowing on.
Yes, you may have heard that and may have come across that somewhere. That's one of the few things in the pre-Socratics that might come up in like more popular culture. Right, you can't step in the same river twice. So this is, as he says, right, universal flux. Everything is always changing. But then also this idea of a dialectic of opposition. So let's see. Well, 23, that's on universal flux. Do you want to read 23?
23. It is in changing that things find repose.
Right, so the idea that change is the only constant would be a simple way. And then the dialectic, the idea of, there's also this idea of opposition. Timothy, number 25.
War is both father and king of all. Some he has shown forth as gods, and others as men. Some he has made slaves, and others free.
Right, so can you see gods here? Like, what does he mean by that in the context? Does he literally mean gods? Anybody? Zeke?
I think it's more of like, I'm thinking almost more like kings or powerful men who gain power from war.
Right, exactly. Like that's. I remember we said that. It seems like Zeus would have been some ancient king, right? And Hera would have been his queen, and right, he was kind of behaving like an ancient king who is not very virtuous, right? So that maybe Heraclitus had some idea of that. That when you're a successful king, right? As Tolkien said, history becomes legend, legend becomes myth. Some he has made slaves and others free. In the ancient world, I mean, slaves, it wasn't race-based slavery. Slavery was whoever lost the battle. And they actually considered it like the merciful thing to do. And instead of slaughtering them all, they would make them slaves. And so that's how slavery, right, was in the ancient world. So there's winners and there's losers. And it's kind of, it is a little bit pessimistic, right? It's a bit harsh. But of course he would say, well, that's how the world is. 26, now he's broadening that out. So it's not just, war is not just about, he is talking about war. That's the thing, it's both and, it's not either or. It's not either he's talking about war or it has a symbolic meaning. It's both he's talking about war and there's a broader point. Next one, Timothy.
It should be understood that war is the common condition, that strife is justice, and that all things come to pass through the compulsion of strife.
Right. So, what would be like, well, let's go to 28. That might help with, what does he mean by this? That everything happens by, opposition or strife? Head, Timothy, 28.
There is exchange of all things for free, for fire and of fire for all things. As there is a wares for gold and of gold for wares.
Wares is like goods, like wares, things you sell. So you can make gold into all these different things. I don't know, rings, jewelry, chalices, and then you can melt it all back down into the gold. So then, I think what he's saying here is, remember, we're kind of back on that line of the Milesians, right? The Milesians are materialists. Then there was Xenophanes, who was like, said there's a God who seems spiritual, right? Because he's not in any one place, he doesn't have eyes or ears. Then there was Pythagoras, who at least said the soul is immortal. Now we're back to the Milesian mentality, except for instead of picking what does he think the basic element is? Fire, right? So instead of water or air, like Thales and Anaximenes, now we have fire. So as far as the material principle, he's saying it's fire, right? It's pretty clear about everything going into fire. Number 29, this is kind of his naturalism.
This universe, which is the same for all, has not been made by any god or man, but it always has been, is, and will be an ever-living fire, kindling itself by regular measures and going out by regular measures.
Right. So remember, Xenophanes said, if God had not made figs, honey, figs would be sweeter. Well, this universe has not been made by any god, right? See? So this is what you call naturalism. Naturalism is just the denial of anything supernatural. You can see how naturalism and materialism typically go together. I say typically because if you're a pantheist, they don't. Because if you're a pantheist, right, there's a God who somehow seems to transcend nature. Christian?
Yeah, so here, is he like a monist? Is he kind of like being, like Thales was like everything's water, Heraclitus says everything's fire?
Right, and so he is a monist about nature, about matter, that it's all fire, but typically we qualify him as a process because that's really secondary. What he's more interested in is the process of change. So he's a process thinker. So sure, he does answer which element he thinks things are made out of, but really change is what he emphasizes, that everything is constantly changing. And that's something that the Milesians didn't really emphasize the same way. Let's see. Let's, not just change, but also dialectic or opposition. Matthew, let's read 27 on the dialectic.
Homer was wrong in saying, would that strife might perish from amongst gods and men.
So that's from the Iliad. This is why we did the Edith Hamilton book, because they're constantly referring to Homer, Hesiod, all of that. And otherwise you just wouldn't even know what he's talking about. It would just be some distant memory from when something you read 40 years ago. Homer, right? In the Iliad, remember the Iliad is his tragedy. It's about war day after day. And so Homer naturally says, well, would that strife would perish from amongst gods and men? Would that there would not be a Trojan War where people are killing each other all the time? And then he contradicts that. So he's very surprising, Heraclitus, right? He's very much like a nonconformist. He says if that were to occur, all things would cease to exist. So notice he doesn't say if there weren't fire, all things would cease to exist. He says if strife were to cease, then everything would cease to exist.
Is he using strife as broadly as possible? For instance, like if I were to make change for this cup by picking it up and putting it down, like it is at repose and it's at rest by me picking up and putting it down.
Right, exactly. Like some of the later some of the later ones, the paradoxes, right? And I mean, there is a precursor to that. Remember which was the second one, Anaximander, right? On page 54, right? The unlimited, the fragment, the only fragment. The unlimited is that from which things come and into which they return when they perish. So instead of calling it the unlimited, he's calling it fire. By necessity, giving satisfaction to one of them, making reparation for their injustice according to the order of time. So he's taking that, he's somewhat influenced by Anaximander there, but he's making it much broader. Like everything is, opposition is fundamental to nature and also to progress. So this idea, the universe has not been made by any god or man. Even the idea of putting man and God on the same level, do you see how this is very naturalistic? Like some god, some quote-unquote god, Zeus and Hera, who lived 1,000 years ago and, right, eventually were worshipped, right? I mean, with the Romans, they actually did worship the emperor, right? As, remember, the emperors proclaimed themselves to be gods. So it's this naturalism, and then part of that is, well, let's read 24. Gerald?
Okay, so
Huh?
time is a child, moving counters in the game. The world power is a child.
So see, this is very good practice for learning philosophy, because it's these sayings that they're basically, each one of them is not each, but many of them are puzzles. So you really have to think, like, what is he getting at here? And it's good because it helps us to, like, reflect on things, you know, because he's not giving you the answer. He wants you to think about it, and right, which is, philosophy is supposed to be a reflective exercise, right? Anybody? Yep.
It's almost like he's saying time is sort of like it's almost like an arbitrary force in the sense that
Good, right? It's arbitrary, right?
Yeah, so it's
Right, like, I mean,
game of chance.
if you play chess, I mean, I have the experience. My 6-year-old, she wants to play chess. Can you imagine how she moves the pieces? Like, what is not happening? She's not obeying the rules, right? So it's time as a child moving counts the game. Like you said, arbitrary. It's just chance. Like, so how is this the opposite of, let's say, Homer? Like, is there some sense of providence in Homer? Sure, right? I mean, you know, Zeus will look out for you if you're good, and if you honor, I don't know, Athena, then maybe she'll help you out, right? They're invested to some degree in what humans are doing. Right? They're concerned. Is there any idea of providence here? Whether it's a true providence like Xenophanes, right, seems to talk about, or whether it's polytheistic providence. No, like time is just things just happening. It's a child, like there are no rules, right? There are no rules for why things happen. Like accidents happen, people get killed. There's I don't know. You see, this is the pessimism of it. Mm-hmm. You know, there's a storm, people drown. Like that's it. There's no time's a child. How about the royal power as a child? Yeah, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was gonna say with the royal power as a child, it's like the unreasonable, like the force of time has no use of reason like a child, but it's also the most powerful force that there is in existence.
Exactly. So there are just these forces of nature, and you know, there's a storm, and the ship drowns, and that's it. Like, so whereas in the myths, who had the royal power?
God.
Zeus, right? Or even for Xenophanes, remember Xenophanes says God moves everything by the thought of his mind. God is omnipotent, so he does have a kind of royal power. Well, not here. Here it's just the child. It's just arbitrary. So that's a good word for it, arbitrariness, as opposed to providence or even fate, right? Remember Homer said, well, even Zeus, even Hamilton pointed out, even Zeus has to submit to fate. Is there any fate here? No, it's just things randomly happening, and if there's tragedy, that's just what I mean. Natural tragedy, obviously. You know, if someone kills someone, then that's because they chose to. Although you could still subsume that under this. You could say, well, that's just how things are. So, okay. Let's. How about number 40 on the next page? Gerald.
The fairest universe is but a heap of rubbish piled up at
Anybody?
Sounds like Martin Luther.
Mystic.
What's that?
I was gonna say, it doesn't sound very optimistic.
Exactly, right. So the Fair's universe, the word there in Greek is cosmos, because cosmos means like the orderly universe. Cosmos means order. It's for like neat. It's where we get our the cosmetics. Cosmos like neat, clean, beautiful, order. The cosmos is but a heap of rubbish piled up at random. Anybody?
I think he says in another fragment about like the best weather is just like the most random like weather, something like that.
Good. The
And
randomness again. There's no providence. So that's why I'm reading it after the other one to show you that when you group them together, you can see kind of how they reinforce each other, as opposed to Pythagoras, right, where there's all this order and in the universe. Okay. Let's number 32. Gerald.
The transformations of fire, first sea, and of sea, half becomes earth, and half becomes the lightning flash.
Okay, so just like in the Milesians, that one basic element transforms into other element. So, right, obviously, sea means water, right, and then there's earth, and then lightning flash, I guess, is a different form of fire, a more sophisticated form of fire, right? Number 34. Sure.
Fire lives in the death of the earth, air in the death of fire, water in the death of air, and air in the death of water.
Okay, so this cyclical thing like we saw previously, right, with different elements. 35, Derek?
The thunderbolt pilots all things.
So what do you think about that?
Zeus.
Is he talking about Zeus? He's saying Zeus is up there on Mount Olympus?
He's not, but that's what it sounds like.
Right, so why is he doing that then?
I was going to say like he's pointing to like the destructive part of nature.
Right. And why does he pick the thunderbolts?
It's fire.
Yeah, he mentioned it.
Is this like a meta commentary on
Exactly.
Zeus?
Well, on the go ahead.
The gods and
Right, because Zeus, what did Zeus have? The thunderbolt, and so what is he basically trying to do here by mentioning the thunderbolt?
It's like naturalizing the
Exactly.
gods.
Right, exactly. Because remember, he gives the lightning as even higher than fire. It's like a higher form of fire. Look at it; it's so loud and powerful. So he's saying that's what Paul thinks, that the highest, the highest form of fire, but it's not a personal being. So it's basically a kind of subversive, right? He's subverting the Greek religion. He's rejecting that idea of Zeus. Good. Okay. Next up, the human soul. I guess we can go along with that. So number 43. Who's next? Brian.
43.
Yeah. So this is about the soul, and remember, the soul was immortal for Pythagoras. Let's see what he says.
The soul is the vaporization out of which everything else is composed. Moreover, it is the least corporal of all things, and is in ceaseless flux. For the moving world can only be known by what is in motion.
Okay, so your soul. So here, the soul, he says, is a kind of vaporization, like a hot, steamy substance. Number 44.
I'm sorry.
Keep going.
44. Okay. Souls are vaporized from what is moist.
So vapor. Think of like steam, right? Water vapor. That's what he's talking about here. So is it right? See the materialism of the soul, right?
The soul has its own inner law of growth. A dry soul is wisest and best. The best and wisest soul is a dry beam of light.
Okay. I know it sounds funny to us, but I mean, think of it this way: like, if your nerves are firing properly, your neurons firing properly, then you have a good, soul. And because he talks about drunkenness pretty soon, right? Whereas if you drink, it messes up the functioning of your brain. Like, that's all there is. Like, now he doesn't really talk about the brain. He didn't necessarily know about that. Remember, they didn't really figure out the brain's function until about 400 years ago. So it took thousands of years. So you'll notice history of philosophy to some degree overlaps with history of science. Most people aren't really interested in history of science per se, but they do overlap, right? And so those are recent discoveries. So to see how he's in a sense, a modern materialist would say, well, you know, how are you conscious? What's your soul? Your soul is your brain. Like, there is no soul. There's just your brain functioning properly, right? Go ahead.
The souls take pleasure in becoming moist. A drunken man has to be led by a boy whom he follows stumbling, and not knowing whither he goes, for his soul is moist.
So what does it mean then?
I guess his soul is drunk. It's
Right. So drinking, right? It's a kind of super primitive neurophysiology. It doesn't actually work that way. But we could tell you, a materialist in 2025 could tell you why alcohol affects your thinking. And then he'd argue, well, there's no soul here. There's just your brain. And your brain's functioning is not correct. You see? So the dry soul is like a soul that's being moderate and abstaining from, you know, eating too much, drinking. Do you see what I mean? Just like nowadays, they could say, you know, materialists say, well, you should be healthy, and that's it. And then when you die, that your body decomposes. Like there's no you after that. Next.
It is death to souls to become water, and it is death to water to become earth.
So are souls immortal like they were in? No.
It doesn't sound like it. No.
He says that, right? Yeah, it's death and become water. That's how they die. Yeah. The vapor. Think of it this way: the vapor is hot, right? You add something to the water vapor, and it's hot, and then it just turns back to water. So that could tie in with like the idea of vital heat, right? Your body has warmth, then when you die, it becomes cold. So that the steam has just gone back to water. So now you're dead. Yeah.
Conversely, water comes into existence out of earth, and souls out of water.
So is it the gods or God who gave you your soul?
No, it's something just kind of came out of the earth.
Comes out of, well, what does it comes out of?
And then it comes out of earth. Water comes out of the earth, and then soul comes
Right,
out of water. Right?
exactly. So purely naturalistic explanation. Nowadays we'd say, well, you know, you have DNA and your body forms a brain, and then you can think, and then you die. And, okay, yes.
I was kind of wondering if there's a connection between how he views the elements as being cyclical and the soul being wet kind of makes it closer to death, whereas the soul being dry makes it. It's kind of like he affirms the goodness of being dry, but the desire for man to be wet and close to death.
Yeah, you could say that. So I mean, you can tie the different elements together, right? Fire is a basic element, and so when you're dry, you're kind of more fire-like. So you could certainly analyze it that way. Yeah.
I was going to say also, it doesn't seem like he's all that wrong. He's
Yeah.
wrong, but you know, we do come from the earth. I mean, all the molecules and things
Right,
that makes
right.
up. I mean, yeah.
So this is where Aristotle's going to come in later. That Aristotle agrees with the materialist that we are partially material, but then he agrees with the idealists, like Pythagoras, that we do have an immortal soul. So that's kind of why, if you wonder, why does Aquinas choose Aristotle? Why didn't Aquinas choose to follow Heraclitus? Well, Heraclitus is a materialist, right? Naturalist. Whereas Aristotle was trying to take the best of both worlds, which is, you know, yeah. So all of these are interesting, right? I mean, 54. Why didn't you read that, Michael? Right?
A foolish man is a flutter at every word.
Right. What would he maybe be talking about there?
He never shuts up.
Okay, or his reaction, like rhetoric, that if someone's using rhetoric, then, you know, he's swayed immediately, as opposed to saying, well, wait a minute, I'm not going to believe that. Like, resisting what you might be hearing. Gullible would be a good word for it, exactly. Yep, exactly. Someone who's very gullible, or another word you could use is credulous. They believe whatever you tell them. You could see how that would apply to the myth, right? Oh, so the Hera and Zeus are up on a mountain? Like, go ahead.
Fools, although they hear, are like the deaf. To them, the adage applies that when present, they are absent.
I mean, is there any scriptural parallel to this idea?
Yes.
Matthew?
Yeah, when he says, like some of my words will fall on deaf ears.
Right, you hear but you don't. You see but you hear but you don't understand, and you see but you don't perceive, that kind of thing. Of course, when Jesus is saying that, it's a complete different point. But because he's not a naturalist. But there is that basic idea of trying to move beyond just, I don't know, everyday life and go deeper. Number 56.
Excuse me. Bigotry is the sacred disease.
So this, remember, right, there's footnotes, even though they're not noted, there's notes in the back that this is helpful for that. The sacred disease was epilepsy.
Oh.
And so the Hippocratic Corpus talks about that. One of the words called the sacred disease. Don't ask me why. I mean, you could research it and find out. But bigotry, so epilepsy means like you're kind of out of control of yourself, you're spazzing out. And he's like, bigotry is the sacred disease. So it's a very colorful image, like someone who's not really in control of their reason. They're just reacting to things irrationally. Okay.
Most people do not take heed of the things they encounter, nor do they grasp them even when they have learned about them, although they think they do.
Right, so kind of like thinking that you have knowledge when you don't. Like, well, no, the myths explain everything, right? But actually he's saying, no, they don't. Why don't you go to number 60?
Corpses are more fit to be thrown out than dumb.
Oh.
So there's kind of the precursor to like modern anthropology and things like that. Sociology is someone named what's his name again? Giovanni. I forget his last name. But he was like in the 1700s. He was an Italian, and he started to analyze just societies because that's really not a medieval thing, analyzing societies. But in the 1700s, this Italian guy started to do that. And he says, like, there are certain things you observe in every culture, because now they know about, like, America. And he said burial, right? Like, every culture has some kind of burial, right? And so, right, there's something that happens to the body. Right? There's no real culture that just says your soul's annihilated, right? It's atheists who say that. And so here, when he says corpses should just be thrown out, right, it's showing you he does not believe in the immortality of the soul, if it weren't already clear. So even if he thinks to talk about that, I think we have to take it symbolically, right? If he seems to be saying it's immortal, you have to look at the majority of the text, and then the minority ones, or the outlier, you have to read symbolically in light of what he states more clearly. Because there is always that, right, symbolic meaning and kind of paradox. Uh-huh.
Well, I was going to say further, I was thinking more so like as soon as the soul departs and the body begins to decompose and lingers with disease and whatnot, it needs to be thrown out as far away as possible. Like there's no meaning once the soul is departed.
Right. I mean, so you could think that. The question is, right? Does he actually talk about an afterlife? Let's see some of these other ones. How about number 66? Tyler?
Immortals become mortals. Mortals become immortals. They live in each other's death and die in each other's life.
So does that sound like the soul is immortal? Because if it's immortal, then how does it become immortal? How does it become mortal? You see what I mean? So you have to weigh. You kind of have to be careful. You have to weigh you have to basically read all of them and get the big picture, and then see if he's being symbolic or sarcastic, right? Or ironic. So, for example, 59, in Hades, souls perceived by smelling. You say, well, that means that souls go to Hades, just like in Homer. And Hesiod. But what did he say about Hesiod, number 6? Much learning does not teach understanding, otherwise it would have taught Hesiod. So does Hesiod have wisdom? No. So did he actually think that you're going to go to Hades? Would that be a naturalistic worldview? No. But then what did he mean? Well, it is. That's why he's called Heraclitus the Obscure, right? In Hades, souls perceived by smelling. On the other hand, he did say that sensation is very important. Eyes and ears are more accurate witnesses than ears. We should use our senses, right? And then in Hades, it's true. In the Iliad, in the Odyssey, in the middle, when he goes down into Hades, he sacrifices the blood, and the Hades are drawn by the souls. There's something called manes. They're drawn by the smell. So what he could be saying is, even in the myths, the souls use smell to know what's going on. They use their senses. So that could be his way of promoting empiricism, right? And saying that, basically, but he's being ironic. He's not saying, I think there's a Hades where the souls smell blood and then come and drink it. Because that's what happens in the Odyssey in the middle of it, right? Because it kind of gives them vigor. It makes them feel like they're alive again. so that Odysseus can talk to them, because otherwise they're kind of like stupefied. So he's not saying, I think there's a Hades where the souls smell blood and so on and so forth, right? Because then he's agreeing with the myths, which he's constantly been dismissing. Rather, he's saying, look, even according to Homer, your senses are important. That's what really matters. You see. So you have to be very careful not to take it literally. But also number 66, right? Immortals become mortals. Like, are there any immortal gods if they become mortals? You see the paradox? You see how he's trying to use that to make a point? What could that mean? Immortals become mortals. Mortals become immortals.
Like the legend.
Good. Like the one you had read, right? Where, remember you read one like that. War shows some forth as gods and others as men. If war makes them gods, then what does it make them? Immortal. Right? But then are gods always worshipped forever? Are there any civilizations whose gods are lost and disappear? Sure, like, there's actually a book on that in the library, but it's kind of Victor Davis Hanson, who's a classic scholar, a very good classic scholar. And he wrote a book on the fall of civilizations. Like Carthaginian civilization, they lost to Rome and it's gone. He gives a number of historical examples of civilizations. I mean, we could think of in the Americas, right? The Mayan civilization, we just pieced together all these different, the Toltecs we know almost nothing about, right? If you know about history, I don't know, Stonehenge, like how did they make all that? Well, there was some kind of civilization there and we have no trace of it. So the immortal gods become mortals and they die, they disappear, you see?
Yeah.
But it's paradoxical, so you have to really think about it, because otherwise there's a surface reading, like, oh, well, and Hades' soul perceived by smelling. Remember, too, in the context of Greek polytheism, they're like, well, we're gonna execute you because you're denying the gods. It's like, no, in Hades, the soul is perceived by smelling. Like, see, I don't disagree. It's a way for him to kind of stay out of trouble by not always, did you follow? So the immortals become mortals. That's a pretty strong statement, isn't it? Are the immortal gods supposed to become mortals? Does that ever happen anywhere in the Greek? It's not really. I mean, the gods are, their whole epithet is they're immortal. Zeus never gets killed. Apollo never gets killed. Atlas never gets killed. Even the Titans are bound up. They're not just ever killed. Mortals become immortals. Well, if war makes some men into gods, then it makes some into immortals. And then they live in each other's death and die in each other's life. Well, you'd have to think about that. But you see, you have to think further what the meaning of that is. How about number 69, right? Each of us has a guardian spirit, they would sometimes say. Eric? 69?
A man's character is his guardian divinity.
So is that supernaturalism or naturalism?
Naturalism.
Right, it's just your character. You don't have a spirit that makes you good, that's helping you to make good decisions, like we saw with Socrates. It's just you have a good character to make good decisions, you see? So the kind of naturalism that is very prominent in today's society in 21st century, here we see, right, it's a very ancient idea. Okay. So next time we'll finish reading Heraclitus, because I don't want to rush through it. But you know, try to, if you feel free to read them again if you haven't already done so, and try to think about them. We'll finish Heraclitus and start Parmenides.